Good evening, everyone. Oh, I love that. Hello. Hey, girl. Hello. Awesome. Good evening, and welcome to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I am Doretha Williams, and I serve as the director for the Center for the Digitization and Curation of African American History. Thank you for joining us for Futures of Black Digital Humanities, Toni Morrison's editorial legacy, and the tradition of dancing minds. This program is in collaboration with the Center for the Digitization and Curation, the Project on the History of Black Writing at the University of Kansas, and Howard University's Center for Applied Data Science and Analytics. The center is dedicated to the digital preservation of Black history and growing the next generation of scholars and specialists. And we here at the Smith Center have partnered with HBW over the past 7 years to digitize its collection of bibliographic information and author material since its founding in 1983. The Smith Center is also a supporter of Howard University's Summer Mellon program and at the Center for Applied Data Science and Analytics, where we have had the opportunity to present and share with those students about careers in museum, cultural studies, archives, and libraries. We also welcome the staff of the Project on the History of Black Writing. Our founding director, Dr. Marianne McGrahm, are you here? No, okay. And of course, our incoming director of the Project on the History of Black Writing, Dr. Aisha Hardison. For transparency's sake, I'm a proud graduate of the University of Kansas, both the English and American Studies program, as well as a former staff member of the Project on the History of Black Writing. We here at the museum are proud to be part of the long history of Black folk in the digital age. And we here tonight celebrate and reimagine Black digital futures. I will welcome now Dr. Aisha Hardison to the stage. She is the Susan D. Garber Chair and the Associate Professor in the Department of English at Indiana University, Bloomington. She explores questions of race, gender, social politics, and historic memory in her research and teaching in African American literature and culture. Following Dr. Hardison's remarks, Dr. Kenton Ramsey will offer an introduction to the Black Digital Project and introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Dana Williams. I will bring to the stage now Dr. Aisha Hardison.
Good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the National Museum of African American History and Culture for the Futures of Black Digital Humanities Conference. As Doretha said, my name is Aisha Hardison, and I am the Susan Garber Chair and an Associate Professor in the Department of English at Indiana University. I'm also the Director of the History of Black Writing, a recovery and digitization project committed to the preservation of African American literature. HBW, as we call it, is one of the partners in the Black Literature Network, whose website launch serves as the occasion for this evening's event. In addition to acknowledging the generous funding support of the Mellon Foundation, thank you, Mellon, it is my task to recognize several people involved with this collaborative project. Whereas such acknowledgement typically comes at the end of convenings like this, I'm happy to express my collective gratitude for the contributions of several individuals whose work might otherwise be left behind the scenes. I want to thank Digital Humanities Professor Margaret Smith, as well as Jessica Despain and Kristen Hildenbrandt, the co-founders of the IRIS Center, an interdisciplinary facility at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, that supports scholarship utilizing digital content. More specifically, Meg was able to take ideas from brainstorming sessions and develop them into a clear vision that served as the basis for the Black Literature Network's first prototypes. I also want to thank Dr. Hannah Park, an associate professor in the School of Architecture Design at the University of Kansas, as well as her design research assistants, Monica Can, a KU alum and currently a UX UI designer at Ingenious Design in Kansas, and Morgan Botts, a senior undergraduate KU design student. Their work has been instrumental to the Black Literature Network's website design and focus group studies. It is also important that I credit the team of University of Kansas computer science graduate students, more recently Brian Lee and Dominic Tasso, who helped materialize the current iteration of the Black Literature Network website. These students, supervised by Professor Drew Davidson, developed the code running on the website's portals. Their work building the site speaks to the project's educational impact, as it has been a professional development opportunity for both undergraduate and graduate students. Moreover, I would like to express my gratitude to the Black Book Interactive Project, or BBIP as we call it, as well as 2 staff members from the History of Black Writing, namely KU English doctoral candidate Ashley Simmons, who contribute to the content development of the site, and HBW's research project manager, Sarah Lentz, who coordinated the project's efforts and administered the project's budget, which, as you can imagine, is no small feat when organizing numerous students, staff, faculty, accountants, and policies across several institutions. HBW's longtime partner, Doretha Williams, the director of the Smith Center for Digitization and Curation here at the museum, has also been critical to HBW's work, as well as arranging this evening. And last but not least, as Doretha also mentioned, I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Miriam McGraham, the founder of HBW. I joined the Black Literature Network upon her retirement from the University of Kansas this past May, and thus I would be remiss not to acknowledge Mary Emma's work on the project from its very beginnings. In 1983, Mary Emma launched HBW to recover African-American fiction writers. As a graduate student and an early career faculty, she did research in library archives and sought out books in home basements to create a comprehensive list of all Black novels published. It was, and still is, an ambitious project Mary Emma likes to refer to as literary archaeology. The work evolved as technologies also advanced, so that her printed catalog became a database, and now it's a digital archive. Although Mary Emma could not be here tonight, I know she is as excited as I am that tonight's event will reveal the various ways the previous technological methods of literary study meets our current technological age to realize the futures of Black digital humanities with the launch of the Black Literature Network. As my last part in tonight's program, I introduce fellow co-PI Ken Rambsy, who will introduce the Black Literature Network and its innovation in further detail. Ken is an associate professor of African American literature at Howard University with a dual appointment in the Center for Applied Data Science and Analytics, CADSA, as a data storytelling specialist. His 2002 book, The Geographies of African American Short Stories, explores the nuanced literary art of African American short fiction, examining how writers depict characters navigating diverse social and physical environments. Dr. Rambsy is also the author of the Jay-Z mixtape, published in 2018, and Lost in the City, an exploration of Edward P. Jones's short fiction, published in 2019, which connect directly to his research interests by illuminating recurring themes in Black creative worlds. I would also add, beyond his expertise and his diligent planning of this evening's talk, Ken is the heart and passion of the Black Literature Network. And now, everyone, Dr. Ken Rambsy.
All right, good evening, everyone. It is an honor to join you as we celebrate the launch of the Black Literature Network, a significant milestone in Black literary studies and digital humanities. This project reflects a shared commitment to making the richness of Black literature accessible to all. So I want to begin by thanking my co-PIs, Drew Davidson, Aisha Hardison, and Howard Rambsy II for their vision and expertise. I'm also deeply grateful to Sarah Arbonat, our grant manager, for keeping us organized and on track, as well as the CASDA team, the graduate school, and the English department at Howard University for their incredible support. English. A special thanks goes to Dr. Doretha Williams, the Smith Center, and the entire team at the National Museum of African American History and Culture for hosting us in this remarkable space. I'd also like to acknowledge Desmond Handon and the entire Ethnicity brand team for their outstanding efforts in planning and logistics, which made this event possible. The Black Literature Network began in a barbershop where my brother, co-PI Howard, often engaged in conversations with Black men who were seeking recommendations for meaningful books. These exchanges evolved into personalized reading lists, tailored to reflect each person's stories, interests, and aspirations. This idea of meeting people where they are and connecting them with literature that speaks to their lives lies at the heart of the Black Literature Network's mission to make Black literary knowledge both accessible and deeply personal. So at the heart of this platform is our novel recommendation tool, which allows users to discover Black novels based on personalized criteria. Built on verified metadata of over 1,200 Black novels, this resource connects readers with the literature that resonates with their individual interests, where they seek historical narratives, contemporary voices, or themes. For example, when searching for a novel, searching for Beloved, I entered attributes such as a novel by a woman writer, a neo-slave narrative, and published in the late 20th century. In seconds, the tool guided me to Morrison's iconic novel. Once a novel like Beloved is selected, users are taken to a detailed page containing contextual information and recommendations for related novels. This feature fosters deep engagement with Black literature, encouraging connections across themes, authors, and historical moments. By highlighting contemporary works, the platform inspires readers to build understanding of African American literary traditions and their interwoven narratives. Below the novel recommendations of Beloved on the home page, readers are connected to even more resources that expand their understanding of the novel and its significance. For instance, the Literary Data Gallery, which uses visualizations to highlight trends and themes in Black novels. The podcast series features scholars who provide intriguing, unusual, and surprising and little-known responses to African American novels. And the literary briefs offer concise, focused overviews of the themes and connections across works, helping readers explore the broader context of Black literature. Together, these features invite users to engage with the Black literature in innovative and dynamic ways. So tonight, we are fortunate to hear from Dr. Dana Williams, a scholar whose work embodies the mission of this project. As we celebrate the launch of the Black Literature Network, Dr. Williams will share a data-informed insights into Toni Morrison's role as an editor, offering new perspectives on her impact on Black literature. Immediately following the lecture, Dr. Howard Rambsy will lead a talkback session, providing an opportunity for audience engagement and deeper discussion on Morrison's editorial legacy. To help promote the launch of the Black Literature Network, I encourage you all to share experiences tonight using the hashtags BlackLitNetwork, Black Digital Humanities, Futures of BlackDH, and BlackDH. Now, I want to take some time to introduce Dr. Howard Rambsy II, also known as my big brother, and he told me to keep it brief, you all. Howard Rambsy is a distinguished research professor of literature at Southern Illinois' Edwardsville, SIUE, where he teaches courses on African American literature, rap music, and comic books. Rambsy has received approximately $1 million in external grant funding, where he has served as a principal investigator or co-PI. In recognitions of his contributions, he was awarded SIUE's highest rank of Distinguished Research Professor in 2021, and becoming the first Black professor to achieve this in the university's history. I hope that was short enough, Howard. Next, I want to introduce our esteemed keynote speaker, who also told me to keep it short. Dr. Dana Williams is a professor of African American literature and dean of the graduate school at Howard University. She currently serves as the president of Modern Language Association, MLA, the former president of the Toni Morrison Society, and the former president of College Language Association from 2014 to 2016. Dr. Williams has held key leadership roles, including past president of the Association Department of English Executive Council, chair of the Black American Literature and Cultural Forum, and a member of the MLA Executive Council. She also serves on several prominent boards, including the American Council of Learned Societies, the Hurston Wright Foundation, and the Furious Flowers Poetry Center. I met Dean Williams on my first year of graduate school at CLA when she was then the vice president. So it's not lost upon me now that I get to introduce her as MLA president. So without further ado, you all, please welcome Dean Dana Williams to the stage.
Good evening. I'm so excited to have Kenton as a colleague, even though it's still very difficult not to think of him as one of my kids. But he's an adult kid. I have many of them, some of whom I'm sure are here in the audience. It is often the case that when one accepts a generous invitation from friendly colleagues to offer remarks for a watershed conference like Futures of Black Digital Humanities, that one of three things is true. In the first instance, the recipient of that invitation has such an incredible mind that deciding which idea to pursue for the lecture is the biggest challenge. I can assure you, I am not that person. In the second instance, the recipient knows immediately what the topic will be and begins to adjust a work in progress that will hopefully satiate a waiting audience. Admittedly, I found this option tempting. I have been working on a book on Toni Morrison's editorship at Random House Publishing Company for a long time. After more than 10 years of wrestling, that book is now finally in production and scheduled to be published in June 2025. With a HarperCollins imprint, Amistad, the oldest imprint devoted to titles for the African American market at any major New York publishing house. In the third instance, the recipient uses the invitation as an opportunity to try to make sense of chaos. I stand squarely behind door number 3, challenging myself to stop reeling long enough to use this opportunity to cast visions of liberated futures in these perilous times. The beauty of Toni Morrison's legacy, of course, as a writer and as an editor, is that she left for us an exhaustive record in thought and in deed. I want to use one such record at the outset to frame my remarks and to begin to unpack my subtitle. Morrison titles the remarks given on the occasion of her acceptance of the 1996 Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters, "The Dancing Mind." In this short speech, Morrison offers 2 anecdotes, one about a young man of privilege who had to learn to, quote, sit in a room by himself and read for 4 hours, followed by another 4 without any companionship but his own mind, end quote. The other about a writer experiencing potentially fatal vocational oppression. Despite having lived a life that had always been filled with events that were supposed to enhance him, the young man struggled to be one with his mind without disturbances, a skill that was once quintessentially characteristic of any young literate person's life. Unlike the young man, though, the writer had cultivated the skill of intellectual solitude and wrote under duress, aware that she could suffer physical danger, even death, for writing. Casting herself among women who wrote against the grain, the writer who understood that every moment she wrote was a risk to her life, wept quietly as she spoke to Morrison during a break at a Parliament of Writers symposium. "You have to help us. They are shooting us down in the street," she cried. Then Morrison asked, what could she do? The writer's reply was deceptively simple. "I don't know, but you have to try. There isn't anybody else." We who are in this room find ourselves in a similar position. There isn't anybody else. What the young man as reader gifted himself and what the writer at risk was willing to fight her government for was the intimacy and the liberty of the dancing mind when the reader's mind and the writer's mind touch. Let me quote Morrison at length here to connect her awareness as writer to her awareness as editor. "The reader disabled by an absence of solitude, the writer imperiled by the absence of a hospitable community. Both stories fuse and underscore for me the seriousness of the industry whose sole purpose is the publication of writers for readers. It is a business, of course, in which there is feasting and in some sense even Cohen. There is drama and high spirits. There is celebration and anguish. There are flukes and errors in judgment. There is celebration and anguish. There's brilliance and unbridled ego. But that is the costume. Underneath the cut of bright and dazzling cloth, pulsing beneath the jewelry, the life of the book world is quite serious. Its real life is about creating and producing and distributing knowledge, about making sure that the environment in which this work is done is welcoming, supportive. Morrison's work as an editor included the costume and the serious life of the book world. In the same way that Morrison reasons that the two stories circle each other, as do Costume and The Serious, what I hope to highlight tonight are the possibilities that reveal themselves when data and Black literary scholarship circle each other to offer more nuanced understandings of Black literature and its cultural significance. Take a look at these scrolly telling visualizations created by Howard students Raven Shaw and Kishana Washington, both of whom are data rangers in Kitten Ramsey's Black Data Lab. Using the index I provided of the books Morrison edited, Raven and Kishana created a data set that offers an insightful overview of Morrison's editorship. And the one thing I'll say is I wish I had this data before I started this book. It might not have taken 10 years. Here we can see that they have charted each year of Morrison's editorship, helping us to understand when she's most prolific when she publishes nonfiction, the novel, reference works, short stories, autobiographies or memoirs, poetry, and anthologies. It gives us, obviously, the data visualization to see when she is the busiest, which genres she tended to be most attracted to. In this next slide, we see that they have organized the work that Morrison edited by genre. You can see there were as many novels and nonfiction as there were one of the other. The autobiography and memoirs were a little bit less, the short stories, even fewer, poetry, and then anthology and reference works. I can talk a little bit about why poetry tended to be a smaller number. It wasn't because she was not attracted to poets or because she preferred fiction, but because the publishing industry really saw very little commercial value in poetry. Poetry collections don't make money. Part of the work that Morrison was trying to do was to push Random House to be true to its aim of being about literary art. In this slide, we can see that the years are organized around Morrison's busiest years, where in 1974, for instance, she edited 11 books. Again, it would have been helpful for me to know and to think about this as I was organizing chronologically, where to center so much of my attention and to begin on the front end to think about what was happening at that time that made that year such a watershed for her. Then we can see that with the nonfiction books, Women, Race, and Class by Angela Davis, The Case for Black Reparations Among the West and the Rest of Us, that her work in nonfiction rivals that of the novel especially. And then one of these final slides we'll take a look at, and we can come back and talk about some more of the data sets a little bit later. But the students sharply organized the authors by race. So as much as people talk about Morrison as editor, as really doing the work of bringing Black women writers, particularly Gail Jones and Toni K. Bambara, for instance, to the fore, we can see she actually published as many, if not more, Black men as she did Black women, and that there were quite a few white writers who were involved in her editorship as well. I could go on, but alas, I'll stop here. In part because talking about Morrison as editor is important for a number of reasons. When I began to work on this project almost 20 years ago, the overwhelming majority of Morrison scholarship really ignored her work as an editor. The late remarkable scholar and human being Cheryl Wall was one of few exceptions. I speak her name and invoke her memory and her presence in this moment. The release of the film Toni Morrison's The Pieces I Am brought much needed attention to Morrison's role as editor, but by and large, people still focus mainly on the fiction and more recently on the essays. The most widely accepted trends in recent African-American literary scholarship are at least partly responsible for this silence, and here's where we see the possibility of the intervention of digital humanities work intervening into African-American literary scholarship so that some of the challenges that we saw in the 80s won't necessarily follow us. As Adolph Reed argues in Tradition and Ideology in Black Intellectual Life, contemporary Black scholarship of the 80s reflected an outlook that smoothed out important elements in Black intellectual and cultural history. In an effort to put forward a, quote, distinctive and coherent tradition in Afro-American thought, too much of Black literary scholarship in the 1980s resisted the messiness of Black literary history. A quiet disinterest in how books are made and how they make it to our shelves is perhaps another reason on why there is so little scholarship on Morrison's editorship. We know major authors, but we don't know their editors. And something in us believes that we don't need to, or that we shouldn't. For a brief moment, at the height of the Black Lives Matter era, we were a bit more attentive to the role that publishers, critics, and reviewers play in the culture we consume. You can see here, for instance, the New York Times article, which focused really on the conflicted cultural force and what it meant to be Black in publishing. Again, this is post-George Floyd. But that moment was short-lived. The next time publishing around Black publishers especially makes it to the Times, a lot of us are gone. How the push to diversify publishing fell short when we saw the departure of major figures who had been big hires. What this makes us realize is that editorships have, by and large, and still continue to be, reserved for white professionals. The third reason Morrison's editorship has gone largely unexamined is related to the first and the second, but distinct from these even. The sheer amount of time and research it takes to explore an editorship that spans over 20 years is not for the faint of heart, especially when scholarly trends tend to exalt shorter, single-authored books that make neat, if discursive, arguments. A meaningful examination of Morrison's editorship would be anything but short and neat, however. In fact, such a book would be characterized by all of the messiness of the archive and all of the tensions inherent in African American life and literature. Here is where the data and the digital might be most helpful. With the help of a series of movements in the spirit of the dancing mind that I mentioned earlier, and in the tradition of the late dancer and choreographer, Judith Jamison, I want to make good on my promise to use this opportunity to cast visions of liberated futures in these perilous times. In the same way that Morrison always invited the reader to participate in the text, I invite you now to join me in the dance. Movement 1, peace. There is a certain kind of peace that is not merely the absence of war. It is larger than that. Those are the lines that open the dancing mind. Like Morrison, I am attracted to that kind of peace, the satisfaction that one gets from thinking with a writer by reading and thinking with the reader by writing. The interplay between solitude's withdrawal and the dance's engagement. But I am also ambitiously interested in the kind of peace that does mean the absence of war, real or metaphorical. As the prospect of imminent but not inevitable wars looms, we would do well to marshal those voices that understood the textured layers of peace. One writer Morrison edited comes to mind almost immediately, Huey P. Newton. Newton's storied battle with police officers and correctional authorities dated back to 1966 when he co-founded the Black Panther Party with Bobby Seale. The party grew quickly from a local organization in Oakland to a national organization garnering media attention. On May 2nd, 1967, not quite 6 months after its founding, the party made national headlines when a group of Panthers took up arms, appearing before the California State Assembly carrying rifles, pistols, and shotguns to protest the Mulford Act. This act repealed the law that allowed people to carry loaded weapons and made the Panther patrols, which observed police to deter abuse, among other things, illegal. A few months later, Newton was shot and arrested for allegedly shooting a police officer during a traffic stop. When Newton's trial began in July 1968, thousands of demonstrators gathered to show their solidarity with him. But on September 28, 1968, a jury found Newton guilty of manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 2 to 15 years. Coordinated rallies at federal district courts in 20 cities were held on May 4, 1969. Newton's image as a national figure could not be ignored. When the California Appellate Court reversed the conviction, it ordered a new trial, and 2 subsequent trials ended in hung juries, resulting in a dismissal of the charges. Newton was released. Interest in a book explaining his positions was more desirable than ever. When Newton's attorney pitched the idea for a collection of essays that chronicled the development of his political and philosophical positions, the manuscript landed on Toni Morrison's desk. The early pieces are, quote, naive, awkward, and inaccurate, she suggested to her editor-in-chief, Jim Silberman, who had invited her to consider the book. Quote, but some of the later ones are good. Altogether, the essays show the development of his thought, and it does develop and mature. And there's some wide open criticism of his own party, all very healthy, end quote. She recommended deleting the weak essays that were submitted and editing of all of those that were to be included, even those that had been previously published. It was important to Morrison, quote, that the Panthers and their prose be given the benefit of editing and thus be shown in its best light. Morrison and Newton's corresponding relationship was convivial, and the production of the book was collaborative, even beyond necessity. Even amid complaints that a curious public knew too little about him as a person, Newton convinced Morrison that To Die for the People should focus on the practice, theory, and ideology that informed his thinking and the party's essence instead of using the book to talk about himself and to offer personal reflections. He and Morrison kept in focus the goal of the book, which was always to collect in one place a map of his thinking. He was determined to shift the party's focal point from armed revolution to survival programs, survival, pending revolution, and a book could help him do that. The party understood the racialized lens through which Black Americans rightly viewed the world, but Newton knew that coalition and international politics were necessarily elements of the revolution. To help make his point, Morrison helped him to arrange the book to reiterate the point that revolution is a process that must be practiced in community with others, not just analyzed or theorized in relative isolation. Morrison was determined to position Newton as both critical and reflective. With rare candor, she wrote, quote, Newton acknowledges internal struggle and rivalries within the party, describes what he believes are errors in judgment in the party line behavior, and proposes courses of action to rectify these errors, end quote. That was important work in Morrison's estimation. His ideas were not smoothed out. Rather, they were messy, sometimes at odds with each other. Quote, contradictions are useful, though, she opined. They clarify and advance the struggle, end quote. In other words, the breach between peace and revolution, in her view, could be closed, but it involved struggle. My point here is the discourse of peace is knotty and sometimes requires revolution. And the dance can only occur when an open mind meets another. Her job as an editor was to try to make peace the fruit of the dance and to make it irresistible. 2, language. It is almost always the case that the most urgent discussions are the ones that are most difficult to have. At the heart of this difficulty too often are assumptions about the limits of language and the frameworks we use to carry meaning. The writers most adept at having the important urgent conversations are also perhaps guilty of hiding their hands by making it look easy. Writing and thinking are radical, intricate, and messy acts. As readers, we have to peek behind the word work curtain to see what the writer has left on the cutting floor. Morrison exposes the writer's enigmatic work in an interview with Jane Bakerman. Quote, part of the process ought not to be apparent to the reader, she notes. Quote, the point is to make it not look like it's sweating. It must appear effortless. No matter what the style, it must have that. I mean, the seams can't show, end quote. Part of our task as readers and as Black literature scholars especially then is to intuit what it has been left on the cutting room floor and to seek it out. Data tells us as much about what we don't know as it does about what we think we know. If we are attentive, we come to understand the understated, undisclosed function of language, even through the polished, beautiful whole. In fall 1973, Toni Morrison met Lucille Clifton in her office in New York to get acquainted with Clifton and to talk about Clifton's ideas about the project she wanted to work on next. Morrison had become Clifton's editor following Nan Talise's department from Random House to Simon & Schuster. After their meeting, Morrison wrote to Clifton to express excitement about the work. I've read all of the new poems, Lucille, and they are so good. Very different, the feel of the collection from the other two. It's not just the content, it's the what, fabric, I guess, or tone, end quote. With few exceptions, Morrison's editing of Lucille Clifton's poems was light. Clifton had titled a poem, I Am a Black Woman, for instance. There must be 800 of these, Lucille, meaning poems with that title, Morrison wrote. So she suggested calling it, And I Am Not Done Yet, which was the first line of the poem in draft. Clifton took Morrison's advice and changed the title of the poem. Then there's the poem To Miss Anne. Morrison noted, "It works marvelously, but please delete the fourth verse. You don't need it. The other three images are thunderous and should not lead up to Little Rock spit. The other verbs are watched, walked, handed, very civilized, very poisonous. Spit? Well, no." Clifton did publish the poem with a fourth stanza, but without the vitriol of the original one. In the poem, Miss Anne is a stand-in for white women who, through the years, have taken full advantage of their mismatched relationships with Black women. I'll read a bit of the poem. "I will have to forget your face when you watch me breaking in the fields, missing my children. I will have to forget your face when you watched me carry your husband's stagnant water. I will have to forget your face when you handed me your house to make a home, and you never called me sister. Then you never called me sister, and it has only been forever, and I will not forget your face." For Morrison and Clifton, who evidently agreed, the first three stanzas did the work of being righteously dismissive, poisonous, in fact, without reducing the poem's speaker to the incivility of the white women who spat at the children in Little Rock. Little Rock pulls the poem out of the ages and into the newspapers, Morrison had argued. The new stanza, in contrast, added the final blow, making clear that the reality of a shared humanity remained unacknowledged, not by Clifton, but by the least humane ones. After publishing 3 books of poetry at Random House, Clifton finally completed the book of prose she had begun years earlier, Generations, a memoir. She had signed the contract for the book in April of 1969, and she and Morrison had talked about it when they first met, but she decided against publishing it, deciding to publish An Ordinary Woman, another book of poems, first, in large part because Clifton did not feel ready to publish the memoir. She had tried to explain the concept of the book to her then editor, Alice Mayhew. Clifton wrote, "It'll take months because the bringing of one's insides out, especially for somebody who has made a life of holding very carefully her insides, is some hard. Also, I think that after I bring them out, I'll have to trot them back in and hold them again. That's hard. I shall take me apart and then put me back together. But you know, I can do that if I just would." Peace, in this instance, turns on the writer's ability to do word work in community with someone who understands that, to use language to organize chaos. It took 5 years and a new editor for Clifton to accept her own challenge. She appreciated having Morrison, another Black woman, as a sounding board for Generations. Morrison's enthusiasm for the book was immediate. Subsequently, they talked about it at length by phone. A few days after the conversation, and I'm gonna pause here to say, like, how I wish I had the archive of what the phone call was about. All I get is, "So great to talk to you last week. Here's a follow-up message." So having missed all of it, all I can do is take what we have in the archive. Morrison wrote, "Generations is so good. I do love it. What a good time I'm going to have publishing it." With Morrison on board as the editor, Clifton dedicated herself to finishing the book, finally. Generations, you see, told the story of Clifton's family, tracing their lineage as far back as 1777. The book exalted Dahomey women who were known to be fierce warriors in West Africa and their African-American progeny. Caroline Donald was born in West Africa in 1822. Caroline had endured the Middle Passage in a walk from New Orleans to Virginia and became a midwife who earned the respect of the community, Black and white alike. For reasons that are never disclosed, Caroline's daughter Lucy kills her white lover Harvey, and rather than flee, Lucy waits for the mob to come for her. Because the white community respected Caroline so much, they took Lucy to jail and gave her a trial before they hanged her. Legend had it then that Lucille Clifton was the descendant of an openly rebellious Black woman. 3 lines serve as refrains in the text to remind her that she is the daughter of survivors. Caroline's declaration of their Dahomey heritage is one: "We Dahomey women, don't you forget that." The second is the voice of her father as he names the generations of Caroline Donald, born free among the Dahomey people in 1822 and died free in Bedford, Virginia in 1910. The third line, an ending to the ancestral roll call, was similarly optimistic and channeled his great-grandmother Caroline, who would often say, "Don't worry, mister. don't you worry. Caroline's language, don't worry, mister, don't you worry, harkens back to Morrison and her friends' belief that writers have a unique responsibility in times of peril. Language is creative utterance, and language that fuels the dance of an open mind can help to craft a view of the world that says, don't you worry, mister, don't you worry. Language matters. Movement 3, fearlessness. In the essay, Making America White Again, published in the New Yorker days after the first election of Donald Trump, Morrison argues that response to impending loss of white people's conviction of their natural superiority is fear. There are people of color everywhere, quote, threatening to erase this long understood definition of America. And then what? Another black president? A predominantly black Senate? 3 black Supreme Court justices? The threat is frightening, end quote. To slow the quickening of this inevitability, the loss in the belief of whiteness as superior, and in an effort to restore whiteness to its former status as a marker of national identity, a number of white Americans are sacrificing themselves. Quote, they have begun to do the things they clearly don't really want to be doing. And to do so, they are abandoning their sense of human dignity and risking the appearance of cowardice, end quote. Without adequate language as utterance or thought, both poorly educated and well-educated Americans succumb to the fear of the collapse of white privilege, even to their own detriment. This kind of terror is the consequence of an inability to have the minds dance, an inability to deal with the complexity of American mythos and to embrace instead a national narrative that cunningly, operationally excludes the people it claims to protect. From August 18, 1970, 4 days after a judge issued a warrant for her arrest, until October 13, 1970, when FBI agents found her at a New York City Howard Johnson Motor Lodge, Angela Davis was among the FBI's 10 most wanted. For 60 days, Davis was on the run. She had every reason to be distrustful of the government. When she is released, there would need to be a record. There were no signs of the fact that this was the first autobiographical book Toni Morrison would edit. Quite the contrary. Morris gently guided Davis to help bring her story to life on paper, as though Morrison knew exactly what the book needed to be. In some ways, she did, if for no other reason than she knew what it would not be. In a New York Times review of Regina Nadelson's Who is Angela Davis, the biography of a revolutionary, which was published in September of 1972, Morrison was mercilessly critical of the book's failure in her view. Playing on the title, Who is Angela Davis, Morrison opened her review in medias res. On the other hand, who is Regina Nadelson? And why is she behaving like Harriet Beecher Stowe, another simpatico white girl who felt she was privy to the secret of how black revolutionaries got that way, end quote. Morrison's biggest critique of Nadelson's biography was its insinuation that Davis's courage was a function of her exposure to white culture, and her militancy was a result of white teachers, quote, white boyfriends, white psychoanalysts, and a special brand of white terror perpetuated in some respectable colored folks, end quote. Nadelson, whom Morrison referred to sardonically as Regina and Miss Regina, alternately, had gone to Elizabeth Irwin High School with Davis and had naively tried to defend her by labeling her an American. In Nadelson's view, Davis was a black leader and a liberated woman, yes, but she was also an American who was kind of funny. Morrison's signifying was pitiless. Yes, I'm Miss Regina. We all are, she wrote. All in all, the book was a cyclopean view of Angela Davis, offensive in its one-eyed stare. Maybe because the other thing about Cyclops was that he had a taste for human flesh, end quote. Nadelson was not alone in experiencing the wrath of Morrison's indignance about what she viewed as a gross misread of Angela Davis. Once a solid draft of the manuscript was complete, Morrison sent a copy to Bantam, in keeping with a contract for a joint publication with that publisher. The Bantam editorial team sent a report after their review of the draft. After reading the report, Morrison fired off a 4-page response to her editor-in-chief that expressed her frustration with the reviewer's seeming need to use Davis's life for personal reasons. Morrison wrote, I mention this not to carp, but only to indicate that I have found the requirement of Angela to meet somebody else's need, be it personal, sexual, political, or whatever, to be overwhelming. The fantasy moves between two poles. One is, give me some of what you have. The other one is, come on now, aren't you really a sweet, charming girl? I think both these poles operate in many responses to this work, particularly when the reviewer is persistent in her comparison of her own life to Angela's, end quote. Another problem was the reviewer's repeated refrain about the need to see more of Davis's humanity, more of her humanness in the draft. Morrison was unsure of what the reader meant exactly by this, but she suspected that it was chauvinistic. Humanist, Morrison noted, was, quote, a word white people use when they want to alter an uppity or fearless nigger, end quote. The report also seemed to suggest that Davis could not be as political as her self-portrait intimated. Morrison was quick to dispute this. Quote, believe me, she is almost always a totally political person. She does not think the way most people do, nor do respond the way that most people do in ordinary events, end quote. To make her point, she gave an example of a time in an airport when Davis confronted a white man who spoke unkindly to a black woman Davis did not even know. Quote, she walked some distance, Morrison wrote, to get into a battle before I could bat an eye. The brawl stopped not when the police were called, but when the white man ran away. She risks her life easily. Athletically, she moves towards feats that could end in death, end quote. Morrison emphasized the point again, a page later, writing, I must emphasize that there are no two Angela Davises, one political, one human. They are one and the same. She does not tuck her politics away, never. Not even in her dreams, not in the bathtub, not on the toilet, not anywhere, end quote. Morrison's feeling about the report was clear. The general call for more personal material contradicted the specific calls for more material and more information, all of which were political. As you can see, Morrison argued, what fascinates the reader is precisely the political Angela Davis. Ultimately, Morrison was unmoved by the report. After 3.5 pages of insolence, she ended the memo with outright sarcasm. I find the Bantam report wholly useless to me. How nice it would be if Angela were really Jane Fonda and not Joan of Arc. Notably, this was no insult to Jane Fonda, who had visited Davis in prison and joined her at rallies. Rather, it was to make the point that Davis transcended gender norms and was determined to turn the tide in what she saw as a war on freedom and democracy. It was about fearlessness. Lest you think that I have veered too far away from the aesthetic art and more towards the rhetoric of political, I warn you that I gave you fair warning. Visions of a liberated future is all I am interested in. In the worlds of Toni Morrison, as in the world of Black life, the literary and the political have no separation. It's all there. It's all woven together. The data can help us to see this. The seams just don't show. Throughout her editorship, the presence, the transgression, the containment of fear coexist one with another. And in response to such fear, false identities are constructed and ultimately dissolved. As hard as it is to imagine now, our takeaway may be that we can be less troubled by the notion that the peace we crave seems beyond our immediate grasp. Instead, we can enjoin language and fearlessness and engage in the performance of dancing minds. After all, it's dangerous not to. There isn't anybody else. Thank you. It is my pleasure now to welcome to the stage a dear friend, Howard Rambsy, who I have the good fortune of being in conversation with tonight. Please welcome Howard.
All right, good to see you all, to the extent I can see you all, good to see you. I'm going to give you just a second to catch up. Let's give the good sister a hand once again. Boy, I'm gonna say it, because I'm thinking about it, and I know where I am and who all this stuff belongs to, But I am going to say just a little bit about highly qualified women from Howard University. And because when I met the good sister Dana, well, let's just say this, she was the president of the College Language Association at one point. She was the president of the Toni Morrison Society. She's the president of MLA. So when I call her a dean, I'm almost stepping down a little bit just to say that, to call her a dean now. And to think about some of the intergenerational things going on tonight. She's talking about other HU women, Toni Morrison. She's talking about Lucille Clifton. We mentioned Eleanor Traylor. Boy, I got these little young sisters who are grown women. I think about Angel Dye and Carmen Wong. You know, so the Howard tradition runs this long gambit of people, boy. So the president, I wanted to call another one president, but things didn't work out that way. I ain't gonna speak on it long, but it just means a lot. So anyway, that was just that side note. I'm gonna get into it actually about Morrison. I'm gonna start with something that's kind of personal to me. Anybody in this room, you've read Morrison before, like I have. When you read it, you have all these questions that you say, dang, I wish Morrison was right here. So I read her books, and that's what I was thinking. And in 2016, boy, the universe lined up. There was a panel, Toni Morrison Society. And I don't know how this, well, I know how parts of it happened. They had Dana Williams on the panel. I understood that. They had Cheryl Wall on the panel, the great late Cheryl Wall. I understood that. They had Toni Morrison on the panel. I understood that. The part I did not understand, they made a mistake and put me on the panel too. And this is my point, leading to my question. I had 1 million questions for Morrison. 1 million. And when the panel ended, they put me in front of her to talk. Not only did I forget everything I wanted to ask her, I forgot other simple things like my own name. And so fortunately she was there and she helped me and I had a name tag on. And I just couldn't get it out. And she was like, Rambsy, that's your name? And so my only conversation to Morrison ever was yes. Yes. So somebody who said more than just yes to Morrison, I wanted to know, what was it like interacting with her? I know you interviewed her for the book, you talked to her on other occasions. As somebody who could get out more than one word to her, what was that like?
It was similarly daunting. I can assure you, it was similarly daunting. I had done a class with Eleanor Traylor at Howard as a graduate student where she had us examining the fiction writers that Morrison edited at Random House. And she and Morrison were very close. Often when Morrison was unsure about a manuscript or had some questions or couldn't figure something out, she would send it to Morrison. There's this wonderful, wonderful quote where Toni K. Bombara like cusses somebody out and says, if Eleanor Traylor can't do the, if she can't write the intro to this book, I don't want it done, like that kind of thing. So they were in conversation with each other. So I'm in this class and I tell her I want to work on Morrison's editorship for my dissertation project. And she's like, like, and she tells me that's too big of a project. You know, and I'm like a little naive little graduate student. I'm like, I can do it. She doesn't know what I'm capable of. And like by 6 months later, I was like, so I can't do that. But what I want to do is a project on Toni K. Bombara. And she says, no, you're going to do the project on Leon Forrest. I'm telling this story to say, Forrest is the first novelist that Toni Morrison edited. And Forrest is as experimental as Morrison is at her most experimental. So think jazz times 12. And that's Forrest. But I struggled through the Forrest long enough to understand what was going on and putting the pieces together. And I had the benefit of Dr. Traylor explaining to me what Morrison had explained to her, what Forrest had explained to her, and so on. So I finished, there's a lecture on Leon Forrest not long after he had transitioned and become an ancestor, and Morrison gave that lecture. So I was, I think, still at Northwestern on a Ford Foundation postdoc, and I went to the lecture, and me and Toni Morrison, the only two people who know Leon Forrest like this. So at that point, I got like all my street cred. Because she's looking like, why do you know this? You know this work really well. And she said, I had to reread Forrest, like for this, to prepare for this lecture. So I felt like even as a 26, 27-year-old, she was like, okay, little girl. And I saw her trying to test me in some ways. And then so she literally said, so how did you come across Leon Forrest? I said, well, I was in this class with Eleanor Traylor. And at that point, she's like, oh, shit. You know, like, you should have led with that, you know. But I was like on the, you know, I was low key, like, I'm not trying to lead with that. I'm not trying to brown nose. So it really did evolve from the fact that she understood the kind of content mastery that I was fully invested in. And it was at that point, too, that I began to take seriously the project. Because before, I had just surrendered. I was like, this project is too big. Like, I don't have as many lives. And she said something to the effect of, well, if I can be helpful in any way, if you're serious about thinking about the fiction, then let me know. So I took her up on it. I emailed her assistant. I got a train to Princeton. We sat and we had a conversation for an extended period of time.
I would have just been like, yes.
Yeah, well, here's the deal. I was. No, that was the thing. So I say, all right, so you know I want to do this project on the fiction that you edited, because I was like, I'm good in fiction. I'm afraid deathly of poetry, which is why I hang out with Howard, because he's like the poetry dude. So I'm like telling her about the fiction, and for 2 hours, she talked about everything except for the fiction. And I'm thinking to myself, I know this lady knows what I'm working on. Like, how do you say, ma'am? Can you stay focused?
Not with Morrison, you don't.
Yeah, you just sit and you listen. So she pulls these books off of her shelf that I didn't even know about, and she's showing me the cover, and you can just see the pride. Like, I picked this cover. Isn't this a beautiful cover? I'm like, yeah, it is. And she said, well, the editors wanted, Random House had given them the money to go to Africa to take the pictures, but in classic academic style, his chair wouldn't release him, right? Like he couldn't get a course release to go take the pictures. Wow. So she has to go through the kind of open source images to make selections for this anthology, which is the first book that she edited. So she had this immense amount of pride, and all she kept saying was, nobody talks about my work as an editor. Nobody talks about my work as an editor. Everybody thinks about like the novels, but that was really hard and important work. So it was a combination of sheer luck, a very personal relationship where, because I was Eleanor's student, I was okay, and nobody had done any work on the editorship yet. I had talked to a couple of people about it, Cheryl Wall being one of them, and even Cheryl, as a senior scholar, was like, yeah, that's a big project, good luck. And it took 20 years, but, I did some stuff in between. Yeah.
President of everything, yeah, nah, that's all good. That's all good. I was going to, boy, I know how it is, though, dealing with HU people and getting them to stay on focus, because I remember as a grad student at Penn State, Amiri Baraka was going to come through. And somehow, again, I was given the assignment to get him to places. And I thought that was going to be cool, but I'll never forget the first thing he said to me. I don't know how he got, I turned around, he had a drink in his hand. And he says, don't tell my wife I was drinking at this thing. So, of course, anyway, so I know how that is. I was going to ask, though, about a reading question. Usually those of us here, when we say we've read Morrison, we mean we've read Sula, we've read Beloved, we've read her best novel, Song of Solomon. We've read The Bluest Eye, Paradise, everything. But for you, reading Morrison means something different. It means you've read her in the archive. And I heard you say, too, by the way, side note, you had mentioned you wish you had those conversations with her, between her and Lucille Clifton. Call the FBI. I'm sure they have them. Dad, I forgot. Not that that's a bad organization or anything. Not at all. All right. But what is it like reading her now that you've read? For us, it's novels. For you, it's novels. It's correspondence. It's letters to people, like friends. But it's also to, people she works with. What is that? What is it like reading Morrison, I guess, from your perspective now?
I think I would answer that in a couple of ways. One, in the same way that she talked about Angela Davis not being two people, she was not two people. She was, sure, I imagine she was probably different as a parent, But in terms of her kind of aesthetic vision, what she wanted for her, she wanted from other writers. And I've talked to a couple of people similarly, because nobody wants to be alone. Like this notion that you're the only one, that's like nobody wants that. So she wanted to build other writers so she wouldn't have to be the only person. And that was refreshing, because you could see her trying to make sure she would be promoting her own books and talking about other people's books. The most familiar one, I would say, would probably be with Gail Jones, who was incredibly shy and didn't want to talk about her own work. And so when she went out to promote Sula, she went out to promote Corregidora. So much so that one of the editors of a piece said something like, Morrison was like Gail Jones's mouthpiece. But of course, she gets all of Gail Jones's manuscripts, and when she reads them, she immediately writes to her editor-in-chief and says, I've just finished reading a reader who has left me green with envy, because of what she could do. So one, like that kind of genuineness of aesthetic, like I want other writers who are doing this so that I'm not the only person who's doing it. The other thing is I have started to see what might be described as Easter eggs. I'm probably stretching the metaphor a little bit. But there are little things that I'm like, that's where that idea came from. I can see like this discussion. Or the way that she corresponded with Leon Forrest, where she would say, I love what you did with these characters. Characters are so hard for me. Let's talk about this. So there would be things that she would direct him to read, and then she would be attentive to, I understand how to draw and to develop a character, because this is what Leon is doing. So I saw the back and forth between her as editor and her as reader, and then, or her as writer, rather. And then I think I am always trying to put the pieces together. Like, there's a book that she edited very late in the 80s that I think becomes an inspiration for love. And it's a little known book by a woman who had gone through every experience, who had been married when she was 12 and leaves her husband and goes to New York, and like there's a conflict between her and her sister, who's her best friend, that you just see, there's some storytelling in here that I think influences the way that she engages some of her other characters. In the same way that she's very clear, like, yes, doing the Black Book, reading about Margaret Garner made me think about Beloved. And so I think that there are a couple of other places. The reference in Beloved to Sweet Home is to Henry Dumas, an homage to Henry Dumas, who's from Sweet Home, Arkansas, and a writer that she edited. So things like that. The thing that's the most fun, though, is being clear that that woman was just fierce. I mean, she would tell people off in a heartbeat, and not in a, like, just some of the stuff that I read, like, makes that point. Yeah. She suffered no foolishness whatsoever. And so at different points when someone had been paid overtime to do some work, and so they charged the author for that overtime work. And she lit into the accounts payable person, like, at the moment when we can't afford to pay indexes, let me know. I should probably start looking for another job. Like, she held no punches, and I think the archive makes that clear. And it wasn't bravado. It was, she just didn't have time. She just wanted to cut through the noise to get to some level of clarity. And I do think it was about ordering chaos. Yeah.
Yeah, boy, hey, look, now you're helping me understand. I think I knew parts of that, or I sensed that actually from you, which is, I'm telling myself this explains why I just couldn't get the words out when I saw her. I was like, yo, because I know what might happen if I said a certain kind of thing. I should also say, because you mentioned Angela Davis, and I have to mention it, at that same panel we were on, Dean Dana, Cheryl Wall Morse, and me somehow, Angela Davis was in the audience. And during my presentation, I showed a photo that my mentor, Eugene Redmond, had taken of Angela Davis and Toni Morrison. And at the end, Angela Davis came up and spoke to me. And she said, can I get that photo that you had in your slide presentation? I said, sure. I said, can I email it to your assistant? And she said, no. She says, let me just give you my phone number, and you can text it to me. And I didn't have a filter, so I said what I thought. I said, I can't take your phone number. And she says, why? And I said, because you're Angela Davis. And I'm me. And she said, no, you can't. So she gave me her phone. I didn't know what to do. So, and she said, but I mean, don't give it out. I said, oh, I won't. But boy, I text her and she texts back. And I didn't know what to do with myself. Anyway, sorry. Does not relate to anything that's going on, but I had to say that because it was just a moment for me to be in the room with these people I admire, including Dean Williams, and just to hear them talking about literature. So I thank you all again, because I always think of these moments when I'm in a room and I get to talk about literature. So it's something I do as a profession, but it's something I really enjoy. Next question is about writing. When you sit down to write about Morrison, it's not like I write about poetry. And so I had that moment all the time where I'm in a room and somebody's talking about poet, and they're like, Dad, he the only one that know that poet. You know, you don't even get any points for that. You know, because it happens so much. But when you sit down to write about Morrison, whether you are in high school or college or you're a senior scholar, you know all these other people have written about Morrison. So what is it like for you, like, to sit down at page 1 and then at page 400 and be like, dang, I'm writing about this person that people know so much about? What's that like?
It's incredibly hard. It really is. I tell my students all the time, like, I don't believe in imposter syndrome. Like, like somebody told me, like, the key to not having imposter syndrome is don't be an imposter. And I was like, yes, that's exactly right. So I don't have imposter syndrome, but I'm still trying to make sense of what at this point is probably 10,000 images that I've taken from the archive, because we have the benefit of the archive at Columbia and the one at Princeton now, and they will let you take the digital. So trying to order them, which is why I was not joking when I said I wish that the data rangers had been around 20 years ago, because this book would have been done, because they could have done metadata behind it to begin to help me to understand how to make sense of things. But I had to order by chronology. Like, when does this contract get done? Why is there a delay in the contract? Who was the agent? Who was the editor-in-chief at the time? Having no experience writing this kind of book, I didn't get until I was at the end before I realized that my first task should have been a timeline. And I'm like hitting myself, because Kenton tells you that, like, in DH 101, he's like, get a spreadsheet.
Start listening to him too.
Yes, right? Start listening to Kenton. If there's no other message, hashtag Kenton was right. Yes. So he's like, get a spreadsheet, like, start managing the data. And the person who helped, like, bring it full circle for me too is the person he works with now, Amy Yerbar-Kwarkume, because she was like, Dean, this is not reasonable. Like, you understand that you're making this much harder than it needs to be. And I was like, no, I don't understand that. Like, I don't know how to do anything else, which is why that intersection between what's possible in managing big data and literary scholarship is so important. So it was hard, but then you still have to figure out how to order it. And then you talk to people. So the panel that you were talking about was at a Toni Morrison Society conference, which was on Morrison's editorship. So all of the living people, with maybe 2 exceptions, whom Morrison had edited, came to that conference. So again, they didn't have people talking to them about their editor-writer relationship, so they were all similarly open. So had I known that you had Angela Davis's phone number, I would have just texted you and be like, yo, let me get them digits. But
What you want to do now?
yeah, no, but what I ended up doing was like, so part of my answer too is like, it requires a kind of boldness. So I just like started emailing people. I'm working on a book on Morrison's editorship, and she was incredibly helpful in that regard because I was also helping her. So I'm like telling her, here are all of the books that I have. What do you have? And she's like, I don't have a list of all of the books, but let me try to put one together. So her assistant, who has been wonderful, and anytime somebody wants to talk about Morrison's editorship, Renee is very clear, like, you need to talk to Dana about it. So like those connections. So we put together a full list. And the exchange was there. And at that point, she would say, I'd say, so do you still talk to this person, or like what's the contact? And she's like, oh yeah, I'll take care of that. So there were also introductions that happened that required me to be so prepared when I had the conversation because I didn't know whether or not I was going to have another opportunity at it. So when Angela Davis gives you an hour and a half on Zoom, you better know everything you need to know. There's no time for fumbling. There's no time for, well, I had another question. Let me see if I can find my paper. By then, I had my spreadsheet. And I was like, all right. And it was a similar kind of thing. So I said, here's some things that she said in the Bantam report. I don't understand what's going on. Is she the editor? Is this Bantam? And so she explained that her agent had contracted the book with Bernie Geis at Geis and Associates. Geis and Associates went bankrupt. Bantam agreed to do it because he was the person who, this is like my life, tangential stories. Bernie Geis was the person who really popularized the memoir, the celebrity memoir. So before, people didn't care about Marilyn Monroe's life, so he's like the Andy Cohen of, like he's like Real Housewife, like the reality person. So he was interested in this
Somehow get that reference.
Yeah, yeah. He was really interested in this kind of salacious Angela Davis. And so she's just like, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. She had said no many, many times. Morrison went to lunch with Bettina Aptheker and said, Angela can do whatever kind of book she wants to do. It was a similar kind of thing with Muhammad Ali, who was supposed to do his book somewhere else, but takes a meeting and realizes, oh, there are Black people who do this work and who will let me do the kind of book that I want. Same thing, Huey Newton. Everybody wanted the Newton story that was kind of personal, explain these personal conflicts. And so she was there standing in the gap saying, here's the kind of story you'll take. So I say all of that to say, it really made me, I won't say disciplined, because I think I've always been fairly disciplined. It made me relax on, it made me find the balance between knowing everything I possibly could, but also being fully aware that there was something I did not know. So trying to do that dance was, and like, yeah, long live Judith Jameson. Like trying to do that dance was, I think, the thing that characterizes how I am now as a writer. Now, I do think I'm going to take a different turn. Like now that I know how to do it, I'm really committed to the transparency. And so the epilogue of the book is actually the title in my mind is how I wrote Toni at random. So I think it's important to tell people how to do this work because I did it kind of by figuring it out as I go. But I'll turn away from it because it really was hard and all-consuming, and I got some other things I want to do.
Yeah, I love that though as advice because I think about, we're always sad when we lose an elder for all of the personal reasons. But I just started thinking about how much we lose just in terms of the stories, like what people know. Leon Forrest, when Morrison came, you were the one that knew something. When Baraka came to Penn State, I was a student. I upped myself on, there's this somewhat obscure, if you're not into jazz, a guy named Albert Eiler. And you had to be deep into jazz to know Eiler, and I knew a lot of his work, and I knew Baraka did too. So I was ready to talk about Albert Eiler when Baraka and I spoke. And I'll never forget when I started talking about Albert Eiler, and I thought, I was like, oh, it's gonna impress him. And what he said though, he said, oh, what you've heard are rumors. And I said, what? And he said, what you heard were ruins. And I said, he kept playing with me, going back with rumors and ruins. And he said, the thing you hear on those albums, those are the rumors of how he actually sounded when you're in the room. Said the things you hear on those albums are actually ruins of what he actually sounded like. So the advice I gathered from that, what I gathered from you, is just like really taking those moments. And senior people don't like being around me because I ask so many questions. I'm always worried that this might be, I might not get a chance to ask again. So I really go in, or I just say yes. So one of the two. My time is getting low, and then we're going to spread it out. But I had just one more question. It's a general question. It's that back to the reader fan. A few years from now, let's say, the Morrison estate, they're like, oh, we're about to put out these new editions of all of Morrison's novels, and we need somebody to write an introduction. And we come to you first, you at HU. So we got to have somebody from HU write an introduction, and you get to choose which Morrison novel are you going to write the introduction to, and why?
It may surprise people, but probably Paradise.
Whoa, it is a surprise.
Listen, Paradise is such an important book. What Morrison does in Paradise with American mythology could teach us a lot. Essentially, she replicates the American experience and the founding fathers, puts black people in the space doing it, and then interrogates why we are so afraid of other people. So the political me says Paradise, because I'm fully invested in trying to solve this capital other problem, like why we are so afraid of an other. The teacher me probably says Song of Solomon. I think it's my favorite. Yeah, but Paradise, what she does in Paradise is a real achievement in so many ways. I think part of it is the response, like, you know, many like critics have been asking her all the time, like, when are you going to write about white people? And I think Paradise to some degree is, okay, I'm going to write about like an American story and show you like the absurdity of, it's almost like a minstrel. And I remember writing an article about this. Very few people got it. I mean, I'm still convinced that that book is about minstrelsy. That there are, like, these founding fathers are in blackface. But they are doing the same thing of excluding people and acting like it's not about race when it's completely about race. So that's probably it. Although, I might decline and give it to one of my graduate students.
Boy, I know you would. We can take, I guess this, I can't see him, but I hear his mic somewhere.
Yes, Dory's coming and going to lead the Q&A for us.
Thank you so much. Another round of applause for Dr. Howard Rambsy and Dr. Dana Williams. We have a few minutes for Q&A from the audience. Our fabulous Sterling Warren, digital content producer, will now get his steps in today. If you have a question, you can raise your hand and he will find you and give you the mic to ask the question. Raise them high. We got the vision challenge in here with the lights low. Oh, thank you. Bless you, Keith.
Hello, I want to thank you first for this talk. Just being able to hear about, as if you were, I know you did spend time with Toni Morrison, but the read the correspondence and all those things, for you to get that insight and for you to be able to share it, makes me feel like I want to ask you this question because I don't have Toni Morrison, but you're here. So, do you think from what you read and discovered during your research that Toni Morrison would support or think that a writer should, or a black writer, a black author should pursue editing from a black editor, just in terms of getting that support and allyship as she seems like she was giving to someone like Angela Davis?
I appreciate the question. And I think, I'm pretty confident in my response. I think her response would be, get the best editor you can get, and if that editor is Black, great. But do the work a service, because that's the most important thing. So I mentioned in some detail that I decided to publish the book with Amistad, the imprint at HarperCollins, and it's complicated because there were points when I threatened to walk away, in part because they were hemorrhaging Black women editors. And I literally sent the email yo, we got two options. Either you figure out how to get me out of it, and I wrote this to my agent, either you get me out of this contract, or we're moving this book to Harper One, and I'm gonna get Harper One money. And the response was, hold, just hold. We're there's a lot that's going on in publishing, and I said, I'm writing a book about publishing, I know. But it was important to me to go with Amistad, because it was the oldest imprint, and because the person who was the only other Black editor at Random House at the time was Charles Harris. And Charles Harris founded Amistad and sold Amistad. So for me, it was but I teach at Howard, I went to Grambling, I'm blackity, black. So I wouldn't even recommend that to somebody else. It was a political decision for me, because it was important for me as a tip of the hat to Charles Harris as much as it was to Morrison. But had I not gotten good reads from editors, I wouldn't have stayed just for the sake of staying, because it's more important to get the book right. What I decided to do was to stay there and then to call on people like Paula Giddings said, Paula, who had worked at Random House with Toni Morrison, and who Morrison's was full of shade. When Paula Giddings' Ida Sword Among Lions came out, we were at this conference at Howard, and so she says, have you seen Paula's book? And I said, she said, now that's a book. Meaning, I want a book like that. This book about the editorships like this. Paula Giddings, Ida Sword Among Lions is 800 pages, tiny font. Turns over, there are no stones unturned, the whole thing. And I was like, okay, ma'am, okay. So Paula said, when you finish the manuscript, send it to me. Farrah, Yasmin Griffin, so many people said, we will, if this is a decision that you're going to make, where there are going to be limited resources in terms of who's available, because editing has changed so much that it's basically like a copy edit. That's all you're getting. So you push it out and you do public talks about it enough that people help you to understand where you might have some holes that an editor 20 years ago would have helped you to do. So I think she would say you get the best edits you can because the work deserves that.
Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Williams and Howard. How are you? Thank you so much for your talk. I'm thinking about Black women writers historically, such as Harriet Jacobs, Zora Neale Hurston, and one of my favorite, Gwendolyn Brooks, who also had difficult relationships with their editors, especially with Brooks with Random House. Dana, I wanted to ask you, how do you think your book on Morrison will help scholars think about a literary history of Black women and their editors? If a student or a scholar wanted to write a dissertation or a book on that literary history.
I appreciate the question. I think there are enough examples of when those relationships worked really well and when they didn't, that a person who wants to pay attention to literary history understands how to be able to do that. So the example I gave with Lucille Clifton, I think, is a good one, where I don't know that Clifton could have gotten that book out the way that she did without Morrison, and the comfort that Morrison provided her, and having that kind of reader. Different from the poetry. But then there's also a really complicated relationship that she has with June Jordan, where they argue back and forth, and despite being in New York at the same time, they're writing each other letters. And so like the big dread for me is when Toni K. Bambara or Angela Davis is like editing and they're in the same space together, because there's no correspondence. And so I'm looking like, where's the Bambara? So she's like, oh, Bambara stayed with me that week. She's like, she'd run upstairs and she come downstairs and she showed me something and I show her something. She run upstairs and she fix it. And then she come back down and she showed me this and she go upstairs and fix it. And that's kind of sort of okay when Morrison's still alive and she can tell me the other side. But then when there is no archive of it in the same way, and Toni K. Bambara has the best archive ever. Like, it's worth a trip to Atlanta. Forget everything else about Atlanta. Go to Spelman to the Toni K. Bambara archives. Just what she does with language is incredible. So, but the difficult relationships are there, and you begin to think about why people change publishers, why they don't change publishers, what kind of arguments they get into. It's gonna be more complicated now because I don't know how we're gonna archive email. I really don't.
Right.
But because I don't know, for instance, outside of my saying so, like, who will know that I was like ready to walk away from HarperCollins, for instance? You think about what literary history looks like. Or I was telling Howard and Kenton, like, who will know that I had to cut 34,000 words? Because, it's gotta go. Or because I don't believe that you should be punished for buying the book and that bonus content should only be available digitally.
Look, Dory, them recording, so we.
Yeah. yes. So there will be an archive of it in that way, but I think pointing people in the direction of what you should think about. What's the date of the contract? How were the contract negotiations held? What's the back and forth about the terms of the contract, or why something is late, or when something makes the turn? What was that stanza before? How do we see relationships? And so that's probably one of the things that I really wanted to be able to get to, but I just didn't get a chance to get to with the digital, especially to begin to see those webs of relationships, because there is correspondence with Morrison and Gwen Brooks. When Ivan Van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus comes out and nobody can get the book in Chicago, Gwendolyn Brooks writes to Morrison to say, hey, why is Random House withholding these books? Now, Morrison's like, why would a publisher withhold books? Yeah. That doesn't even make sense. But knowing the tension with the relationship and the way that Brooks said that she would often show up for readings and the books weren't there, then you begin to think, there's a lot more to book sales than not.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you though, I ain't trying to go into it, but you did mention June Jordan and Morrison, a certain kind of tension. But then I want to think more broadly, Chicago and Morrison. It seemed like something was like, because I remember you talked about a letter to, I'm gonna forget her name now. Carol Parks, boy. And I feel like one of the hard things with Morrison is she's such a good writer that when she's upset with you in a letter, oh my God. Like, I just remember this line you showed me where she said to Carol Parks, she says, I'm gonna miss our friendship.
Mm-hmm. Like, I thought you knew. She said, Carol, she said, Coit's letter bothered me. Your letter hurt me. I'm going to miss our friendship. I thought you knew me, or something,
Yeah.
And it was, again, because it was about Dumas. When Morrison republished Henry Dumas's work, she was trying to cast him as a Black writer, most especially because the Black book had just come out, and she was clear. So strategically, this is a literary history question. Strategically, she's like, I know what is going to get a reviewer to pay this book some attention. I know how I'm gonna get Random House to throw a book party or not, because they didn't throw book parties for everything. So she was being intentional about how she was casting writers. And Dumas, being a deceased writer, was a unique challenge for her. Like, how do I promote a writer who's not here to promote the work itself? She doesn't mention that Dumas's first publication is in First World.
Black World.
In Black, well, was it First World before?
Oh, it was Negro Digest.
Negro Digest. Yeah. Negro Digest, Black World, you're right. She doesn't mention that. And people are upset that Morrison in this white publishing house which is a whole chapter. How she negotiates the Black arts movement, takes advantage of the Black arts movement for a mainstream white publishing house, which does nothing for Third World, does nothing for Broadside, does nothing for, like, so she's got these relationships with people, but they're kind of like, this mainstream publisher is now attracting Black writers in ways that are pulling us away. And the Black arts movement was on the decline to some degree anyway. Add to that, the bluest eye troubles Black is beautiful, and they just not sure who this Morrison woman is. Politically, they're not sure where she stands. Charles Harris was at Random House, had started the publication Amistad 1, Amistad 2, leaves under difficult circumstances to become the founding director of Howard University Press, and Morrison slides in. So conversation with Charles Harris, he's like, yeah, so what'd she say about me? You know? Like, so how is the narrative being cast? Because it's Charles Harris who convinces Muhammad Ali because of his connections with Chicago. He's connected to Muhammad Speaks. He's built all of these relationships with the Nation of Islam all over the country, especially in Chicago. Charles Harris has built all these relationships with these Black writers at HBCUs, all of these reviewers, because that's where it's happening. He goes, and Morrison just shows up like, here I am. And so there is some skepticism around, can she be trusted? Because her books are events. And they're saying, who gets invited to the events? What are the implications of it? And what happens to Black spaces? And one of the ways that she finally cuts through some of that noise is actually at the Institute for Arts and Humanities, maybe 1976 conference on publishing at Howard. And there she's finally able to cut through the noise and say, the title of her remarks is We All We Got. So she's like, listen, this is how we can do this. And she tries to do some of that in a couple of other spaces, but the tension is thick because everybody has territory and they're just not sure what to make of where she is and what she's trying to do.
Yeah, my bad. I just started connecting it though when you said that. I mean, you always feel a certain tension between the group of Black writers from Chicago and Morrison, and that's it. But I mean, Dean Williams showed me that maybe, I don't know, 8 years ago, and that line just stuck with me when Morrison says to her, I'm gonna miss our friendship. Cause God, you know, like you knew when you read that she meant that. And that was like the 70s, I guess she sent that.
Early 70s, and then at that same conference, in the irony of ironies, Carol Parks is the person who introduces the panel.
Wow.
But again, this is why I'm saying the messiness is really important. To try to smooth this out makes all of the mistakes in the world.
Yeah.
When they put that panel together, you can't tell me they didn't put Carol as the moderator of that panel on purpose. And it was at the same time that John H. Johnson had just killed Negro Digest. Honoring Hoyt Fuller. Hoyt Fuller no longer has a job in the same way. Carol no longer has a job because John H. Johnson. So Carol, in some level of nervousness, introduces Morrison, and she says Morrison graduated from Howard in 1955, and from Cornell at 49. And everybody, I've seen the video of it. There's actual footage of it, right? So everybody in the room is just sterile. Nobody's it's like everybody's scared to move because they don't know what to do. And finally, Morrison just leans over and she said, you got the years wrong, Carol.
Woo.
And everybody just burst out laughing whew. Okay, because Carol was looking around why is everybody mumbling? Because she was she said 1955. She said whatever. Blah. So she lets the air out of the room.
Yeah.
And then that's when, again, you can cut through the noise.
Boy, look.
It's messy.
It's rough in these Black spaces now.
It is.
Look, we don't say it a lot. I know we're at the good, sorry, Dory. I know they say certain stuff on this stage. But boy, it be rough moving in these streets. I mean, it's rough out there in these white streets.
But
Lord, we gonna find out soon enough.
Fearlessness.
But, boy, you roll around these Black streets. And I mean, it's hard because you don't even know when you're walking into a situation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nah. And two, boy, I say this because I live in St. Louis, and I live in a community, and boy, I hear those young sisters on it. I don't ever start anything with them because it's the stuff they can say to you. They can hurt your, look, I'm like Morrison. What they said annoyed me. What you said hurt. So, nah, it's rough. And I just think about some of those tensions. I'm fascinated, though, when you said that about June Jordan, because June Jordan ends up being the one to organize, 40-something black writers to do a letter to the New York Times on behalf of Morrison. Without that letter, Morrison ain't Morrison. Like, it's 1988. She loses, it's one of the best losses in retrospect in African-American literary history. She loses the National Book Award. And just quickly, the story is she loses that, and everybody's upset, but they get especially upset because then James Baldwin dies. And boy, they at the funeral and Morrison's giving the eulogy, and black folks, boy, at the funeral, that's when you really turn up. And so they getting up there, they said, we lost Baldwin, and now we don't have another black writer. June Jordan was the one that led the charge and said, let's get a letter, let's write a letter. It's easy to look it up, you should, but it's like 40-something black writers signed on in support of Morrison, and then Morrison wins the Pulitzer that year and then becomes Toni Morrison right after that. But it does not happen without June Jordan. So for you to even mention now is just so much to me to hear that June Jordan, and side note to that point, Gloria Naylor was on the committee that Morrison didn't get the award. And June Jordan put it out in the streets, like, hey, we ain't messing with her. I ain't say what you think I was gonna say, Dory. She said, we ain't messing with Gloria. So it was a lot of tension in black spaces because of that. But then June Jordan pushed for that letter, and it just changed everything with Morrison. So anyway, I love to hear you say, despite that, there was still tension.
Yeah, and I think there's a question, so I'll say just before that question comes, Morrison was in a conversation with Chinwezu, who was overperforming his masculinity, and hangs up the phone in her face, and she writes a letter, like he writes a letter apologizing, and she says, oh, essentially like, it gave me all of the energy that I needed as I was going to the sales conference to promote your book. Don't worry. Don't worry. But importantly, she says, don't worry. I never stay mad at people, only institutions. And I think she meant that.
Yeah, wow.
Like she's like, it's people. There's this conflict, there's whatever. Like, I can't stay mad at people. So I don't stay mad at people. I only get mad at institutions. And she and Chinwezu were fine. Same thing, she and Barbara Chase Rabu would go back and forth, and so she says, she opens the letter to Barbara Chase, and she's like, I startled myself by getting the sales team to order 5,000 copies of your book. If they all come back, I'll, be devastated. So those were moments of tension when she would still fight for people, even if she didn't agree with them.
I love it.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. I have a question about method. I really enjoyed the talk, and as someone who's trained in history, I was thinking a lot about the silences that you may have encountered in the archive, the contradictions that you encounter in the archive, and a lot of us are not lucky enough to be able to actually go talk to the person that you're actually studying in the archive, and so I'm wondering, how you grappled with that analytically, how you grappled with that narratively as you were, drafting that, especially once Morrison passes and you no longer have the ability to sort of ask those questions that fill in those gaps.
So I'll try to do 2 quick responses to this. One, it was really hard and challenging when I knew the archive said one thing and she would tell me it didn't, and I'm like, ma'am, I got receipts. She's like, no, that's not my book. I'm like, yes, I can send you 12 images where you signed. Yes, it is. So that was hard. And so those are things that I have to put in the book to say, like, footnote, she said this wasn't her book. I don't know why she said this wasn't her book. This clearly was her book. I don't know. And I would even say something like, did you pick this up after somebody else? Like what? Because there would be instances where somebody else started the book and she starts to pick it up. So there's some conversation where she's advocating for Stokely Carmichael. And that was another thing that I think is really interesting, where she would push the firm to give people money when the firm was trying desperately not to give people money. So, and there's a Creole Feast, this cookbook that she did where the chefs were due $7,500 and they weren't supposed to get it until the end of the quarter. And she said, like, this is the difference between whether or not these people get to pay their union dues or not. Give them the money now if you have to take it from me. So there was that advocacy that was there. So there were some instances where I'm like, okay, that wasn't your book, but I know whatever. But then in other instances when it was clearly her book from start to finish and she would just say, not mine. So I had to like struggle with that. The other part in terms of method, and still say, just in a note, because I have to treat it as though I treated all of the rest of them. The other part was, the other response is that it was incredibly hard because I am not a person who writes narrative. I don't do creative nonfiction. Like, I'm a quote unquote scholar. Like, I do analysis. So the hardest part for me was shifting my language from a scholarly book to a trade book. And I'm like, but I don't know if this happened, but I'm supposed to write this as though I knew it happened, as though I were there. So what worked for me was to write it all out the way that I've been trained as a scholar, and then to turn it into narrative prose. That obviously didn't make my editor happy. My editor wanted narrative prose in the first draft, but I had to learn it. I had to teach it to myself slowly. And one of the ways that I actually was able to do it was that video that I was telling you all about from Morrison at the writers' conference at Howard. I watched it and I typed it and I narrated it. And I narrated as though I was seeing it. So that shifted my thinking enough to say, okay, what would this look like if I were watching this? As opposed to reporting this, like if I'm watching it. And that was the thing that I think turned it away from heavy prose. Although Kenton did this voyant analysis for me. And there are certain chapters that have like really low readability. So those are the ones that I'm working on to make them more readable. Like, it was like the voyant analysis and the DH work will tell you like where you're using dense sentences, like where your vocabulary is different. Like, and so those are the ones, I am not exaggerating. I can pinpoint exactly the ones where I didn't have enough archival material to paint a picture for myself. And I was just reporting as opposed to, oh, I know what just happened here. Wish I had the data first.
Hey,
yeah.
Now you know.
Yes.
Thank you, Dean Williams. My question is a little bit also about the data, and you talked a little bit about how you wish you would have had some of this analyses from the DH work as you were writing the book, because it could have been helpful for you, even though you have been in the archives and you've had these personal accounts. Could you talk a little bit about the future of Black DH and where you see, even with some of the work of your colleagues or even your own interests, how literary scholars and then just scholars across the humanities, but especially within English, how we can begin not being so afraid of DH, but where do you see some of these gaps where it could be very useful to illuminate the work that we're already doing?
I appreciate the question because I think the possibility, there's so many possibilities. I still think we don't know as much about early African American literature as we should. I have long taught that anthologies can't be trusted because we know for sure the messiness of the politics of the Norton Anthology of African American Literature, for instance. As many works are left out as there are in. These were scholars who were not trained in the way that we're being trained in African American literature. They essentially self-taught, so they had to read what was available to them. They had to read what, if they were lucky enough to have great mentors who would bring them into certain conversations. So I say that to say, so much of what we now know in terms of books that aren't in the quote-unquote canon tell different stories than those that are in the canon. So when you think about, I'll just give a quick example. When you think about the emancipatory narrative, or what we know as the slave narrative, when we see what falls outside of the things that we teach all the time, the Harriet Jacobs, the Frederick Douglass, the Booker T. Washington, the Olaudah Equiano, when we see what falls outside of that and we begin to think about those narratives that were written in Arabic, or those narratives that were written where Christianity wasn't at the heart, so that Muslim faiths become very clear, it completely changes the way that we think about the early tradition. When we drop Phyllis Wheatley's corpus into some data processing software, we can begin to see that she was probably far less conservative than we think, that she uses irony, because interestingly enough, sometimes the software picks up irony in ways that we don't. So when we see the irony of "'Twas mercy was on being brought from Africa to America," you like the shade Phyllis Wheatley is throwing in that poem. Like, was it really mercy? Particularly when you think about her work as a poet, knowing how to use pagan, you're saying, I don't know, Christianity comes out of paganism, so who really is the oldest? So was it really mercy that brought me from my pagan land and taught my benighted heart to understand that there's a God and a Savior too? No, I knew that before. So I think it changes the way that we read the early literature, which then helps us to think about what's possible in the later literature, like what's possible for the work that we can do. It's harder now, especially like if you teach African American literature too, like after, like, and at this point it could be African American literature 3 or 4. If you're teaching African American literature after 1970, it's a little bit harder to think about, for me at least, the DH. But the early stuff, we're so much smarter when we can see what fell out of the canon, what fell out of those smooth out. And that's the critique that Adolph Reed was making about the 1980s making the mistake of trying to create a coherent tradition. To make the case for African American literature as distinct from American literature, scholars try to make it really coherent on the one hand. He has this other essay that is akin to the one that I mentioned, What Are the Drums Saying, Booker, where he's making the argument that the Black public intellectual does that work and does a lot of damage in that work as well. Because you anoint yourself as the person who knows everything, and then everything else has, like, your vision is this way. Yeah. So the DH keeps us from thinking that all I gotta know is the stuff that everybody talks about. The DH orders that stuff in such a way, particularly the History of Black Writing Project, which, I mean, there are novels that we haven't heard of, that we don't teach and that we don't think about. So being able to figure out what was happening in 1857 without having to have all of those books lined up directly in front of you, but being able to see that on a timeline of what else is happening in the world, you begin to realize that there are other presses that are publishing works. There are people who aren't abolitionists who are printing emancipatory narratives. There are changes that happen in the Black arts movement that are informed by essentially like economics. There's just real economics. Who can afford to stay open? Who can afford to print books in war when paper is more expensive? So all of those things that we don't think about, but when you got all of that big data set together, if you look at the data, it's only as good as the questions you know to ask. So it's not a fix-all, but at the very least, the method of asking, of organizing creates for us a different kind of way of thinking about how we think about what's present and what's missing. Yeah.
I got to just say quickly, anytime I'm on the stage and somebody mentions DH, I'm contractually obligated, I feel, to just say, when I was finishing up at Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi, I met a graduate student at New York University, and she was telling me, she said, yeah, I got this little discussion group on Yahoo Groups. Yeah, see, Dad, y'all don't know about that. You got to be old school. She said, I got a discussion group, and we talking about technology, and you want to join if you want. This is 98 when she told me this. And I got on a group. Her name was Alondra Nelson. Her group was called Afrofuturism. And that's where the term was coined in 93, 98. Only thing I mentioned is to say, I mean, it was all of these black people just talking about technology, but it was without resources. So Afrofuturism was a kind of DH without all the money backing it. So it's just people theorizing in a way. And so I mention that because DH got a lot of this stuff, but it's not a lot of black bodies in the room whenever they're talking about it. So I wish we could blend something like that. Or better yet, I just wish there were moments where just creating those spaces, because I think the technology got so advanced, that idea of groups, like you just didn't have it anymore. But it seems like we should be able to figure that part out, just getting people to talk, hey, just like we're doing today, which is why I'm so thankful for this event. Boy, I got the head nod, and if my homegirl was over there, she had the piano, she would have hit it like, you know, when they be letting you know it's the doom, trying to do it. So anyway, thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you again to Dr. Williams, Dr. Rambsy, Kenton, and Dr. Hardison. We have enjoyed this great conversation. We do ask if I can use this code up here, this QR code, to do our survey. Again, thank you all for this wonderful evening. I know many of you will be doing other projects and work with Kenton and Howard and Dana tomorrow, and we will welcome you later tomorrow afternoon here. So I will greet you in the lobby tomorrow afternoon, so I'll get to see you again. Thank you again. Safe travels. We'll see you tomorrow. 1 minute. What?
I just wanted to really, really encourage everybody to do the survey. It's the difference between like resources and not resources.
Yes.
Do the survey.
Please do the survey. If you have any issues with it, just let us know. Thank you so much. Oh, yes. Yeah. You want to take the picture up here? Get in picture formation. You getting in there? You gotta get in there. Am I getting in this? Yes, you gotta get in there. All right. Federal badge on me.